Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. My name is Faith Harris, and I am the Executive Director for Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Our mission is to collaborate among people of faith and conscience to grow healthy communities by advancing climate and environmental justice. We envision overcoming the climate crisis, eradicating environmental and social injustices, and living in a just, thriving, and equitable world. Each time we gather, we do a brief land acknowledgement to recognize and honor that we gather on Indigenous peoples' land. We are on the lands of the Powhatan and Chickahominy peoples, also known as Richmond, Virginia. If you are unsure of whose land you are on and and where you find it, where you find out where whose land you're on, you can visit native-land.ca to find out. So encourage you to do that, recognizing that we just finished Indigenous Peoples Day a couple of weeks ago. So it's really important for us to remember the larger context in where we live and work and play. Today's discussion is with Dr. Mary Finley Brook, Associate Professor of Geography, Environment, and Sustainability and Geography Advisor for and Global Studies Concentration Advisor, Development and Change, Politics, and Governance. Mary Finley Brook has been teaching geography, environmental studies, and global studies at the University of Richmond since 2006. She has contributed chapters to 10 books, edited books, and published widely across journals. Finley Brook, an expert on the Americas, has developed extensive international knowledge as a geography and global studies professor, documenting a wide range of environmental and social injustices. The focus of her research since 2008 has been climate and energy. Complementing her scholarly expertise, Finley Brook has decades of experience in international environmental and social justice. She was a founding member of the Governor's Advisory Council on Environmental Justice and the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative. She is also co-author of a book, the topic of today's discussion, Climate Crisis, Energy Violence, Mapping Fossil Energies Enduring Grasp on Our on our Precarious Future. I'm sorry, it is also precious. Which is a global textbook addressing the fast and slow violence of fossil fuels and includes extensive coverage from Virginia and the broader region. Her co-author, Stephen Metz of the New School, contributes with participatory mapping strategies and spatial analysis. The research covers 3 chapters on coal, 3 on oil, and 3 on fossil gas. In each chapter, the authors employ applied theoretical, practical, and grassroots approaches with research on resistance, activism, and advocacy. The text includes a lab manual with exercises for embodied and engaged action, as well as technical tools to promote energy justice. We count her as a friend, partner, and resident scholar for Virginia IPL. Greetings, Mary, and thank you for joining in the Environmental Justice Now today.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Mary, before we get started and into the meat of your book, please tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write this book and why this title.
So the beginnings of this book, I have to say, date back to the 90s. And I will start with the energy piece and then get into climate and put it together in terms of the violence and our future. But I originally, being from Vermont, I grew up in a place, I was an environmental studies major at the University of Vermont. So in the 90s, I was aware of the fact that we were getting supposedly clean and renewable energy. So we were mainly getting hydro energy, but it was from James Bay, and the Cree were being poisoned with mercury as a result of this clean energy that was being exported to my state of Vermont. So it really made me very aware of how complex energy is. And in 1995, I had just graduated from university. And I don't know how many of you remember the Ogani Nine, the activists from Ogani, Nigeria. So Ken Saro-Wiwa was one, the poet who had been murdered. And I saw his brother speak at Vermont Law School when I had just graduated. And that was really when I started thinking about energy violence. But if you know my research, I focused on Eastern Nicaragua, and that happened because actually Bernie Sanders was the mayor of Burlington when I was growing up in that area, and we had a sister city program with Eastern Nicaragua during the Contra War. And so I was involved in Nicaragua. I did research. I did my master's and PhD, and I was doing field work. I'm at the University of Richmond, and I was already engaged in that research. And what ended up happening is trying to do community forestry, and these massive hurricanes and these massive storms both destroy the communities and the forests. And it was at about that point, it was about 2008, that I realized I needed to be focusing on climate. And I started researching a Virginia company with my students, AES Corporation, that was committing human rights violations in Central America. It was another dam case. And that's when I started moving more into energy and clean development mechanism. And the foundation of the book was probably about 2016 with the murder of Berta Cáceres. Many of you probably know the Honduran activist that was murdered, and it was found to be not only related with the government, but the dam builders. And so all of these different forms of violence and the conflict that was being created as a result of climate change, and the contradictions between what was supposedly clean energy and the harm that was being done to frontline communities really motivated me to look further. But when I started writing this book, I understood, it talks about violence. I understood violence to be the gun put to your head, because that was the communities and the type of violence that I had been paying attention to. And I realized over the course of the book that there's many, many types of energy violence. And my co-author and I really spend a lot of time talking about what's fast violence. And so there's so many different ways we have fast violence with the energy sector, whether it's the explosions. I mean, there's so many things that happen either in the workplace or for impacted communities. But there's also this slow violence. And that slow violence is very uneven. And so we were obviously starting to look more and more at issues of environmental racism, at looking at where we put projects, where we put clean projects versus dirty projects. And so that is where the book started to take a much broader understanding. And when you look at how we added in mapping fossil energies enduring grasp on our precarious future, it was supposed to be a book about all energy types. And as we got going, I had this long history with renewables. I still do and really love renewables. They're not all violent. Some are, but they're not all violent. But I realized in writing this book, we needed to do the entire thing on fossil fuels. That was where people did not have enough education. We were making the same errors that we made with coal, with oil, and then the ones that we made with coal and oil, we also made with gas. Now we've done it with gas, LNG, all of these other spin-offs from fossil gas. And so it became very clear that the entire thing needed to focus on fossil fuels. Where we get into the precarious future is once you really look at what has happened with the energy sector and particularly the build out of gas since 2006. The climate crisis has just really spiraled and intensified as a result of us not learning, and as a result of us often choosing the exact opposite, based on whether you're taking ecological frames, economic frames, or social frames. We really keep making the worst errors in the energy sector. And I'm going to say the announcement recently of the hydrogen hubs at a national level here in the US is just an example of how far we are from understanding what a good, clean, sustainable, equitable energy source is. So I will stop there because we can get into the meat of the book there, but it has been a long time in coming, let's say.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Mary, for giving us a little bit of background of why you chose the book, but also telling us a little bit about a story, a little bit about your own personal story and journey. And I think, one of the things that occurred to me while you were responding was just how important it is for people of every background and every level, educational level as well, to understand energy and to understand how we get energy and how it's made. so that they can really have a better understanding and a background for understanding these conversations that are related to climate change and environmental justice, because we are seeing more and more environmental disasters and climate disasters that are a direct result of those decisions we've made. And I also appreciate the way that you talked about and raised the issue of how we're making some of the same mistakes because we're using the same framing, the same apparatus, and not really rethinking that what I feel like we've been trying to say, and I certainly have heard this from you many times, but I feel like this is very true among environmental justice organizations in particular, is that we cannot continue business as usual, that we actually have to go back to the drawing board and think differently from the perspective, starting with our values, right? Starting with how we base our economics in our country, but also globally. That's what it's going to require, and that we can't do this piecemeal. We also cannot do this cheaply, on the cheap, in the sense of cheaply, by just adding something to what already is. So thank you for raising those two issues. So now let's jump into some of the meat of the book, because you already have set the stage for us. Tell us about the start of commercial coal here in Virginia, because I know you have three chapters on coal, and its commemoration today, and tell us also why it's an example of an erasure of Black history, particularly in Virginia.
So I want to talk about Midlothian and Blackheath coal mine and Midlothian coal mine. But I first have to kind of put it in context of saying I'm from Chesterfield, so I live within 5 miles of this. I was not aware of this history, partially because of this erasure. So my children played soccer at the Midlothian YMCA for years, and I used to walk all the time in the Coalfield Park that's there. I never really knew what it was. And one time I was actually in a pharmacy in Bon Air, and I saw this book, and I don't know how many people have seen it. It's called Chesterfield County, Virginia Uncovered: The Records of Death and Slave Insurance Records for the Coal Mining Industry, 1810 to 1895. And I started reading about the history of those mines, the Blackheath and the Midlothian mines. And come to find out, here I am, this energy researcher, and this is the site of the original commercial extraction of coal in this country. And it has a tragic history. It's a tragic history related to African-American placemaking, but it has been totally erased. And so what we know from the Blackheath mines is this was the site of some of the earliest explosions. So methane, which is in the coal mines, explodes, and they were sending people in with open headlights. And so the Blackheath mine exploded in 1839. And so there was awareness that this was very, very deadly. And the Midlothian mine, they still continued operating them. The Midlothian mine then exploded in 1882. And in each one of these, it was predominantly African-American miners, and in some instances, children. And what we find out from the book that I read and starting to put together the articles that do exist is that the people who were enslaved, the owners actually had life insurance because they were certain that people would probably not come back. It was such a deadly exposure, and there were all of these explosions. And so what I started to look into is, how does Chesterfield commemorate this? And why has this erasure happened? And I saw that, yes, we can show a slide to, there were sketches of the area. There was commemoration, but it was all written from the rescue. There was an attempt at rescue, and it was predominantly white people, and it was predominantly people from the surrounding areas. And so if you look at the commemoration of Chesterfield mines. It talks about how valuable the coal is. It talks about linking it to the Confederacy. It talks about who the owners were. It talks about a whole lot of things, including these rescue attempts and who was trying to make the rescue attempts. But it really does not talk about the miners themselves. And it doesn't really even mention the extent, the percentage that were African American. So it is absolutely an example of erasure to this day. If you look at the Chesterfield logo, it is a very European miner in a very clean outfit, white and blue, with this grassy land and clean water, leaning on his tools. And so it is absolutely not the reality of what these mines were. And what I've realized in this instance, and it is an instance that I can then trace back to the plantations in the area that were now where the University of Richmond has been constructed, and how this really fits into the regional history, and then the build out of the railroads. And that was, of course, connected to the Confederacy. And so all of this history should be really well known. One of the things I'm working on is curriculum for the high schools, for the Chesterfield high schools and for the local areas, because it does, the fact that we have not corrected this erasure this many years later, on one level isn't surprising, but on another level, it really shows the extent to which people are not aware of this history, and the extent to which we really do keep repeating many of these same errors. And if you look at what the site says, it talks about coal for its export value, but it really doesn't talk about the pollution. And we're still facing today lawsuits and all kinds of problems. I can talk about, modern coal, but this historical example sets the stage for really, centuries of not understanding who is being harmed and the harm that comes along with the coal industry. We always try to tell a happy story, but we don't really look at all the trade-offs and costs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mary. I want to, since we're talking about coal and you're giving us a really great example of historically how coal has been used, or how coal has been narrated, right? The story of coal is narrated in, sometimes a really lovely way, that it provides jobs and, all of those things. But tell us a little bit about a modern, maybe something more contemporary, an incident where we see coal as, where the story of coal is not really being told fully.
So Desiree, you can pop up that other slide. And that one is talking about, so many of us know that the Port of Virginia is both Norfolk and Newport News. And so both Norfolk, what you're seeing here and what you're seeing in the darker color there, is the areas that are over 50% African American. And you can see the coal yard kind of in the upper left. So these are export terminals. We have massive export terminals both here and then in the sister site in Newport News. And at one point it was actually exporting as much as 40% of the US coal. And it still continues to export a lot of coal. The reason why I got interested in this site is because where I live in Chesterfield, I saw the coal trains going past every single day. And I thought, well, I know where they're coming from, but I don't know exactly where they're going to. And so I wanted to figure out how damaging this export is. And what I came to find out is that these facilities had been grandfathered in. And so they were grandfathered in without basic controls that would even keep the dust from flying into these neighborhoods. And so Newport News, like Norfolk, which is the image that you're seeing here, is predominantly people of color. It is also predominantly low income. And there are a lot of exposures. So the biggest shipyard, naval shipyard, is also in that same area and expanding. So people have been exposed to a lot of things, but they are definitely have been exposed to this coal dust. And I remember working many, many years ago with this community, probably back in 2015 or 2016, getting signatures because so many of the children have asthma. There's definitely adult asthma, but there's so many children that were really facing debilitating asthma, and not even being able to necessarily have what they would need to have an inhaler at school, and they were missing school. It was really a crisis. And so what I've come to find out from that situation is the closest air monitors are pretty far away. And we had gone to the Department of Environmental Quality, the community and advocates, asking for a closer monitor, and it didn't happen. The administration shifted, and it didn't happen in the next administration. A couple of years ago, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, gave some funding to the Department of Environmental Quality for community air monitors in this area. And so people really do need to be paying attention to this case exactly today, because they are finally starting to get some more monitors out in this area. It still needs to have more participation in terms of people knowing what's going on. They say community air monitoring, but they did not really let it be the community-based, community-controlled model that people had been asking for. So they're in individuals' backyards. They are getting installed. There is going to be more testing, but this has been going on for decades, already knowing that these massive health problems have been occurring. Another site that is near there that people might be familiar with is the Chesapeake. So Dominion Energy had a massive coal facility. And that one's not in Newport News or Norfolk. This is over in Chesapeake. And so what happened in that facility is they stopped burning coal there around 2014. And the EPA actually let them leave the coal ash in place and not necessarily remove all of it. Some of it was removed to a golf course. And many of you will know how many lawsuits have come out of these cases, because they actually took tons and tons and tons of coal ash and made a golf course. But much of it still stayed there. And what we found out, I know from 2021, that's where a lot of the groundwater testing was coming in, showing that it was leaching arsenic and radioactive elements and all kinds of just toxic heavy metals at rates way above what would be allowed. And so there has been, we just heard this year, Dominion is being forced again to continue to clean out that site. Well, why I'm so concerned about that site, if people know it, it was the proposed terminus. And when we say terminus, we mean like the end point of a pipeline. It was the proposed terminus of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which many people will know this is something that has been canceled. It was also the proposed terminus of something called the Header Improvement Project, which was another attempt to get a pipeline out this area. It is now the proposed terminus of a TC Energy. That's TransCanada. They changed their name. It's a massive project that is right now in front of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The entire project is more than 50% in geographies that are people of color, and more than 50%. So in the route, like the 1 mile area around it, and at these really important sites. So I'm talking about the terminus, which is in this Chesapeake site. So if they go in and dig all of this up, they're trying to say that it's, really just an improvement of existing lines, but they will go in where all of these railroads have put in, there's really a lot of toxicity from all of those years of coal and all the other things that's been shipped, but also all of that coal ash. And again, it is a community that is predominantly people of color. And when you look at the rest of that pipeline, it's called the Virginia Reliability Project. I really encourage people to look this up. It is connected to a lot of other infrastructure. So the Transco pipelines, the Columbia pipelines. And what we've heard now is Columbia is starting to start some permitting for a liquefied natural gas terminal that possibly could be at that site. It isn't being connected. The paperwork that's going in front of the different regulatory bodies is, I call it segmenting, but pulling out different pieces and putting it under different names. It is very difficult to keep track of all of it, but there are people on the ground who are doing a great job. Let me tell you about those other sites, though, because we've gone from this toxic coal site now to these gas facilities. The other sites that are connected to the same pipeline, they are proposing to double the size of the compressor station in Petersburg. So we know Petersburg has the worst health. It has been shown to have the worst health in the state of Virginia. It is often because of these toxic emissions that are already happening. They already have a compressor station there. And the company is saying, oh, it's just really the same thing. We don't even need to go back and have a permitting process. We're just going to use what we already had in place. There's another site in Emporia. Again, we're looking at these African-American geographies. It goes along the Dismal Swamp, and then it heads out through Suffolk and through Chesapeake. And so major disruption, major contamination, and something that is being fast-tracked often at both a federal level and even within our state agencies. There's a real rush that is happening for a couple of reasons, but one of them is the industry is very aware that they're not going to be able to continue getting permits because the greenhouse gas emissions that come from fossil gas or methane gas, people call it natural gas, but that's not a helpful term. So to be more accurate, we say fossil gas or methane gas. And we know that about 70% of it hasn't been measured internationally. And we know that it's really creating a lot of problems in terms of the climate crisis. And so we're really in a rush, meaning the environmental community, to make sure that these things are being regulated. The Biden administration has been talking about methane rules. We're moving in the direction of having international and national regulations. And so gas companies have really accelerated their disinformation, accelerated how they're demanding permits, and really accelerated not only these gas facilities, but these liquefied, and you have to say natural gas there because it's built in LNG, liquefied natural gas, but these LNG facilities that are being approved all over North America. And when you see the emissions that are coming from these, it really, anybody who understands climate change would be feeling sick to their stomach if they really saw the extent to which we're moving in the wrong direction.
So, Mary, I appreciate what you just said, as particularly at the end there. Anybody who understands climate change would be sick. Say more about that. Say more about what's at stake for not only for the global climate, issue and concern, but what's at stake for Virginians? What's at stake for people who live in the Hampton Roads area? What's at stake for the people who live along the Mountain Valley Pipeline and Transco's, proposed expansion? Help us understand that. Help people who are, want to understand but haven't quite fully grasped why we're so alarmed.
Well, things have really changed in the last few months, and I would say since April, just with the amount of alarm that climate scientists have. And we've been following this for decades. We've been knowing that we have been having rising emissions and really a lot of concerns. What has been happening since April? And there's a lot of things that are leading into this, but basically our oceans had been absorbing a lot of heat and a lot of carbon, and they are no longer able to, for so many different reasons. We have abused our oceans the same way we've abused the land, and we've just kind of assumed that they were going to be able to take it. Ocean temperatures are rising in ways that when I see climate scientists talking about it, they're using the F word. It's that alarming to people. The extent to which we are having rapid heat increase. It's coming for many different reasons. We have these things called tipping points that they're positive or amplified feedback loops. And so once you start that process, you can continue that process. And so as we have melting ice and the land gets darker, that means there's going to be more sun being absorbed and we'll have more melting ice. And so we have all of these things like with forests burning, and you have the increased heat, and then you have more forest burning. So we have these things all over the world that we've been calling tipping points. And we call them the point of no return. But we have already crossed several of the boundaries of those tipping points. And so you'll know about the boreal forest, you'll know about the Amazon forest, the ocean currents that I'm talking about. And so what do we have on the line is pretty much everything. And people will feel it differently in the next few years. Our sea level rise is going to be intense. We have subsidence in Virginia, so we are sinking at the same time as we have more than average sea level rise. And so different regions do experience sea level rise in slightly different ways. We're above average. We are more vulnerable to storms than most of the United States. And so I think I had heard, after New Orleans and that area, we are really incredibly vulnerable in the Hampton Roads area, partially because so much of our, we have our hugest population is in that area. Our largest concentration of people of color are in the Hampton Roads area. Our largest economic concentration in terms of all of those military bases are in that area. And when you look at the sea level rise projections, which I do. I encourage you, if you don't know how to use EJ Screen, which is an EPA tool, one of the tools that they have shows sea level rise. And so looking at what is going to be underwater in that area should really alarm people. And I will suggest that we need to be paying attention to the acceleration of how things are moving forward, and really listen to our climate scientists as we head into international negotiations in November. What I really want to talk about is, you mentioned the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And there's a lot of reasons why the Mountain Valley Pipeline has been in the news. It's been 8 years in the news now. So there have been communities since the beginning. So the builders of Mountain Valley Pipeline and the owners now, it's mainly Equitrans Midstream, NextEra, and Con Edison. But when these companies came in, they were incredibly aggressive with landowners. Many of you will know the phrase eminent domain, which basically means for infrastructure projects, companies are allowed to take private land. The way that the Mountain Valley Pipeline came in and really aggressively took land from hundreds of landowners, even to come in for surveying, still has ramifications until today. So some of these cases are still in the courts. But what has happened with the Mountain Valley Pipeline is there have been literally dozens of lawsuits. I know that by 2017, there had been 50 civil cases. So since 2017, it has been nonstop. And what happened this past summer, there had been previous attempts by Joe Manchin and others working in our federal government to try and give this project special breaks, to attach it to different bills, to try and push it through. 3 attempts had not worked. And I'm going to say something that could be laughable if it wasn't so sad, but with the Fiscal Responsibility Act this past year, we attached the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is the least fiscally responsible project I could talk to you about. It's a 303-mile project. It has doubled in price. And so it's way over budget. It's way, way, way behind schedule. It is the most risky in terms of the steepness of the slopes that it's going through. You should never be building pipelines of a 42-inch diameter in that type of geography. There are risks of slippage. There's risks not only through the movement of the land, but going through that terrain has been an incredible amount of erosion. And so there's really been all kinds of violations. And so there has been not only setbacks in terms of permitting, but also corners that were cut in that first round of permits that kept on coming through, and they had to go back to the drawing board. They've been forced to actually do some of the ecological measures that they should have done and had kind of tried to rush through in their original proposal. And so we are at a situation now where it is not fiscally responsible, but this project got their finger put on the scale by our federal government. And then it got attached to our debt ceiling legislation even later in the year, where they took away the balances of power. And so we have a situation where normally you have regulatory bodies doing their thing. You have courts who often have to step in. And this is a case that has gone to the Supreme Court various times already. And then you also should have, you need to have your 3 branches watching each one. And basically what the legislation did was to make an exception. And we hope that this will never happen again, but it set a precedent for a lawmaker to take their pet project that they have investments in and encourage something that, and have received money from, encourage something that is not democratic, that really violates our democratic process and really makes it so, even though our circuit court here in Virginia did have one more opportunity where they should have been able to weigh in, they had to say, because of what happened at a federal level, we cannot make this decision. And so in the last couple of days, I'm seeing more news, more lawsuits, more projections of more time before it can be developed. There's so many concerns about this project, but one of the ones I'm most concerned about, besides the loss of our democracy, and what's more important than that, right? This is a carbon bomb that is absolutely huge, but it also sets a precedent for not following our regulations that are protecting our water in the instance that I'm going to talk about. And so there's epoxy on pipelines. There's this coating, and it is supposed to be there to reduce explosion hazard. It is supposed to be there to keep the system safe, but it's not supposed to sit out in the elements. And these pipelines have been sitting out in the elements now for years. And so standard has it at about 6 months. And so Mountain Valley Pipeline has tried to say, like, this is going to be too expensive for us. We can't take the pipes off site. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do this. So there is a process now where federal agencies are looking at that epoxy and are looking at, how much damage has occurred. But I can tell you, there are people who live along this pipeline, communities, rural communities, who are very rightly concerned, because not only when you have that high slope, which increases the slippage, the fact that you don't have that epoxy, which is supposed to be a protection, gets into situations where explosion hazards are going up and up and up. So this is not a safe project. It is financially irresponsible. It really has done things that anybody should be concerned about in terms of our democracy. Please go look at what our senator from Virginia was saying, Tim Kaine. And so people have gotten themselves into a very serious precedent. And not for a project that anybody should be proud of. We should all be absolutely ashamed that our federal policymakers would do something that makes no sense whatsoever.
Wow, that was a really great summary of the issue and how it intersects with our current situation, the democratic process. We're in an election season here in Virginia as well. And what's going on in Washington, just highlights all of that for us, and why it's so important for all of us to be paying attention, to be, making sure that we're voting, making sure that we're, learn what the issues are, so that we're able to help share that, and to hold our legislators accountable to these, to protecting us from from these long-term and sometimes short-term crises that are of our making in many ways. I know we have just a few more minutes, so can you briefly tell us a little bit about the tools that are included in your book, and then we will kind of wrap up from there.
I would love to. So, and I would also love if people want to be, reaching out to IPL and myself to be finding out more about how to get a hold of some of this curriculum. We are going to want to be making it available in ways that we can. I've done a lot of story maps. I talk a lot about greenwashing and disinformation and industry disinformation. I have something that I call, a praxis. So it's really bringing together the theory and the action, but it's an embodied way of learning about your energy sector. And so there's a lot of exercises in this lab manual that encourage you to look at your own grid, to encourage you to look at your local permits. But we do things like power mapping, follow the money. Right. And so figuring out how these things are happening and why they're happening, go do some power mapping of Dominion Energy, go follow the money, look at where Dominion Energy sends their money, their lobbying and all of this. And we learn a lot more about our grid. But it also talks about climate reparations. It talks about how there are proposals that are called judicial dissolution, and it's called the corporate death penalty. It's basically saying if corporations have caused as much harm as they have, it's called ecocide in a legal sense, the amount of death and destruction that has happened because of fossil fuel emissions. And so if they have caused that much harm, should they be dissolved? And in that dissolution, how would you then make amends, predominantly to communities of color, and it going globally, and then also if we look nationally, low income and communities of color that have been disproportionately harmed. And so there's really some tools for starting to think about how do we get money out of industry that is causing such harm with such greed, having known for decades and spreading disinformation and continuing to spread disinformation, using divide and conquer strategies, harming communities. So how do you kind of pay attention to the harm? And then how do you figure out justice in that situation? How can we be building things that do work? How can we be working with communities so that they are more prepared for the climate changes that are happening around us? But how can we have clean and safe, job providing, community supporting clean energy? And there are solutions. We did put this into the book. The book does start, because of where we are at, the book does start getting kind of dark if you pay attention to really these poor decisions that we've made over and over again. And so we went back in every single chapter and we made sure to reinforce all of the grassroots resistance that has gone on that doesn't make the news. People don't know how many thousands of people are fighting for good, clean energy all over all the time. And so that's one of the things that the book does. It talks about doing, we call it watchdogging. So independent support with technical experts such as myself, paying attention to where laws are being broken and writing about it, talking about it. It looks at ways that you could use either technology in good ways. Some of the remote sensing, some of what we've been able to find out from fossil fuels is because we've been able to have satellite images where we didn't have them before. We've been able to have monitors where we didn't have them before. So how do we get these tools, these science tools, into the hands of communities so they do participatory science? So they are able to see what their air quality is like, what their water quality is like, what's happening to their wells, what's happening to their rivers. And it's a very engaged how-to guide that is, it's aimed for a general public, but I would say high school and university age audiences, and then for anybody who wants to understand your own energy grid and where your energy comes from and all the alternatives and solutions that we have. And we're just not taking advantage. And I don't want to say that in a bad way. There's so many positive things we could be doing in the energy sector, and the clean, the community building, the positive ways that we could be providing energy, and really making strong communities and alternative ways to be healthier is being overlooked. And we have all of those solutions, and we're looking to things that are problems. We're putting more money into fault solutions that are fossil fuels that are claiming to be cleaner and aren't. So I think the greatest thing about the textbook is getting people to look at their own grid, to learn how to kind of break it down into what industry is saying and then what has been proven in cases around the world, and to give people the ability to question and know how and where to question and document. And then it highlights just grassroots movements and what grassroots movements are doing around the world. And the idea is that as we are networking and supporting each other, we can be building these alternatives. We can, be in this moment of a precarious future and work together. And we really don't have any choice, because our future is coming at us. It is going to be a situation where we do need to be worried about water, where we do need to be worried about extreme heat, where we are going to have weather that people never thought they would be seeing in their lifetime. So we need to come together, and coming together to clean up our energy. And I struggle with the word resilient. And so I haven't used it at all. And it's what I want to be saying. We need to have resilient energy, but I also come from a tradition where people say resistance, not resilience, because we're being forced to just take that idea of resilience and not necessarily look at what it would take to be action-oriented or proactive. We're kind of forcing people to just accept and call that resilience instead of being proactive and saying, how can we do energy efficiency? That is the best energy investment of any type. It goes the furthest. It has the greatest impact for greenhouse gases. It creates jobs. The number one investment for energy should be in energy efficiency, getting our load down so that then we can use the renewables. The next thing that I would be working on, it's geothermal, but it's a more shallow geothermal. And what it does is to retire gas lines, retire the fossil gas lines that are leaking that are dangerous, and that are really not as good about providing jobs. That's all what industry says. It's actually not very good about providing jobs. Geothermal is. It is affordable, and it is something that we can be doing in that infrastructure, but it does make us resilient, and the positive way of resilient, so that whatever climate changes are coming at us, we do not need to be using the air conditioner in the same ways, which means we're going to, Dominion's power stations are not going to be able to hold this load. The peaker plant that Dominion Energy thinks that they're building for this reason is not temperature. It's not going to be reliable in a heated environment. And so we're putting investments in things that are not going to actually keep us safe in this heating climate that we are headed into. And so this is a toolbox, a book that can help people learn about what solutions are there that are lives, between life and death type solutions. We cannot afford to ignore them. But at the same time, we need to be so much smarter about some of these false solutions and these fossil fuel solutions. If you could put those two things in the same sentence, I could take that out and edit it. You can't say fossil fuel solutions. It's fossil fuel elimination and energy solutions.
Yeah, so Mary, definitely we have to have you come back so we can talk about this portion of it, what are the real solutions, and what is and some of the dig deeper into some of the possibilities that are available to us that we haven't been actually taking advantage of. As we close out, you mentioned a couple of things, and I just want to put up on the screen the Environmental Agency's EJ screening tool. We want to encourage those who are listening to go to the EPA's website and check out the EJ screen so that you can kind of verify for yourself some of what Mary has shared with us. That so much of the energy burden has been carried and is being carried by Black, brown, and low income communities. And that's just an injustice that one of the reasons why we exist is to bring some balance to actually undo that injustice, that disproportionate burden that Black and brown and rural communities often are expected to carry for everyone else. And so there's the EJ screen. And then as we are closing up today, just want to remind you that you can join and follow Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. You can follow us and join and get our newsletter and learn when we will have these important and exciting guests on the EJ Now Show. So please use all caps when you go to this link so that you can keep up with what we're doing. And then finally, we want to encourage you to encourage your faith leader to join us through this season. This is 2 seasons right now: election season and climate in the pulpit season. And so first, always want to encourage you to get out there and vote. Early voting is still going on, so please do that. Make a plan to vote early, but also encourage your faith leader, whether you're a Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever your faith tradition. Encourage your faith leader to talk about climate this season. And we have some resources and help, but we want you to register with us so that we know how many faith communities are actually taking action to educate their congregants and their members about what's happening on the ground and why their faith tradition has a responsibility to act and to speak out against some of what and resist some of what we see that's actually driving climate change and climate change impact. And as well, we just can't wait for your book to be released and published. We hope to see it in next year in 2024. And we definitely will have you back before that, but we'll definitely have you back, Mary, Dr. Finley Brook, to discuss it even further when it is published. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'll give you a minute to say one last thing that you want us all to remember as we leave today.
I want to say thank you for this opportunity to speak about it. And the main point I would say is, to go back to figuring out your local energy. So your message about voting, your message about reaching out to faith leaders, but your message, whether it's through your schools or ways that you can engage your community to see what's going on. See, when you plug your laptop or anything that you're plugging in, your phone, where does that energy come from and who's paying the highest costs? And that really is kind of the theme of this discussion of this segment that we're doing here. It's very disproportionate. And so people are making uninformed decisions and they're causing a lot of harm. And so please understand where your energy is coming from. Do not assume gas is clean, and really look at what the repercussions are for vulnerable communities, and connect yourself and have some responsibility for your emissions, please.
Well, thank you again, Mary, and thank you to all who watched today. And this is you can always find these recordings on YouTube if you want to share it with your friends and neighbors, family members, and/or your faith leader. So thank you again, Mary, and until next time. Uh, Bye, everyone.